Hello. Picture the scene. The Nefandi unleash some horror from beyond the universe upon the human race. It kills every authority or every power. It takes over the world, and the last remaining humans are tortured forever by tentacled monstrosities from beyond the stars. In contrast, you finally manage to denounce the guy who has been approaching you inappropriately, and the police get involved. There are some newspaper rumblings about it, but ultimately there doesn't seem to be enough evidence because someone in the police just happens to lose the key part of the evidence, and the abuser then donates a large sum to the police, and the story is basically buried, and you have to sort of go on with your life somehow. Now, I've just given you sort of two opposite scales of horror. The first one is the death of and torture of every human being, and the second is a personal tragedy in a somewhat unfair system. And yet, in a lot of cases, the second one will have a lot more resonance because it's real. So, when it comes to hope and horror in the world of darkness, I'm often of the belief that a more positive world, a more realistic world, a more, if you want, hopeful world can often be more horrific than the extreme, hideous darkness ones, because we can relate to it. So, if it's a bit like conspiracy theories, the attraction of conspiracy theories, even though it sort of has a terrible worldview, is that someone's in control, they're the Illuminati, they're the evil ones, of course, but you personally are very important, and someone is in control, someone out there that we can rail against, and this sort of extreme evil is more palatable than a sort of slightly broken world with lots of uncomfortable things that don't never really solved or just marginally improved. So it is the same in the world of darkness. If you want a really horrific story, then something that actually happens in the world, maybe tone down all the supernatural elements, just a little bit of it, but something that really happens in the world, corruption, someone getting away with stuff, unfairness, visceral unfairness, but that it doesn't destroy anything, nothing is sort of really solved, and you have to go on. Now that is a very horrific and maybe a bit too realistic take on things. So I would say that horror and hope in the world of darkness are not necessarily antagonistic. In fact, they can be combined, and there is something deeply comforting about a terrible world. Now, I have seen the terrible world trope done a few times in ways that really grip you. Brazil, the movie, for instance, really does it well, and Unsong, the online Kabbalistic alternative reality, has a vision of hell that really gets you. But most of the time, the extreme horrors, though objectively worse, sort of just feel safe because it's blatantly not the case that the government is run by aliens or vampires or things like that. But minor injustices might just be too real. And you can play in that area, though of course if you tone it down, then there is always the risk of getting too personal. In the LARP I take part in, Empire, they have strict rules against no sexual violence or coercion is allowed in this world at all. You can have torture, you have murder, lots of things like that. And the reason is very obvious, is that things that are realistic affect us more. There are people in the game who presumably have encountered sexual violence. Very few of them will have encountered murder and even fewer torture. So this is something to bear in mind. You can add a lot of horror by making your world more realistic. And similarly, you can tone down the feeling of horror if it's getting too intense by making it over the top, revealing that this is some powerful vampire or something like that, or just adding a bloodbath and a battle. Things like that sort of can release the tension. So I thought I'd just suggest a new way of playing with hope and horror. Thanks for listening.